everyone, it's Tyler back with another video. This week I'm talking about race modeling, what it is, why we do it, and how you can implement it into your training so that you can get faster. Now, race modeling, very simply put, is just practicing your race or a portion of your race the exact way that you want to execute it on race day. And this can be the entire race, like in a time trial, or it can be a portion of the race, like the first half of your 400. And there is an advantage to the more workout style approach, which is that you give your athlete multiple attempts to hit the same level of output. So if you have 3 shots, you're going to have a much better chance that at least one of them is the desired output. And it also avoids a lot of the fatigue that comes later in the race. If you run an all-out 400, that's a lot more difficult to recover from than doing a single 300 or a couple of 200s. That can make a big difference in the recovery of your athlete in the next day and the following day when it comes to your other training. When we talk about why we include this in our training, it's pretty obvious. You're going to get better at what you practice. And not only do we focus on things like maximum velocity, acceleration, training the energy systems of the body, there are workouts that target all of those things. Race modeling is just a type of workout that targets the skill of racing. And executing an efficient race is a skill that some athletes have a lot of room to improve in. And here is why an efficient race matters. We want to make sure that we're getting to the finish line just at the point of fatigue. We want to be crossing the line, looking a little bit tired, but not completely falling apart, because if you're falling apart, that's going to add a lot of time. But we also don't want to be looking so fresh at the finish line, feeling perfect as we cross the line, that we feel like we could have tried harder early on in the race. So it's all about finding that balance between the proper level of exertion, but still being controlled enough to have energy to finish the race. And this is one of the big advantages of track and field. You can find that level of exertion very consistently because the race is always the same distance. It's always going to be 200 meters, 400 meters, 800 meters. I'm going to talk about this from an energy usage and a fatigue standpoint a lot when it comes to the 200 and the 400. So I'm not going to talk about the 100-meter dash much. Race modeling is still really important, and there are, especially at the elite level, differences in how you want to execute your race. But for the most part, especially at lower levels, you almost always lose the 100 meters, not because you didn't run an efficient race, but because the person who beat you was just faster. In the long sprints, though, we really do see a difference in race execution. You can save considerable time pretty quickly by just changing your strategy a little bit. If you're going all out on the curve in a 200 and drastically fading away down the stretch, that can add on a lot of time that you can pretty quickly clean up without actually becoming a better athlete. The 400 is even more drastic because let's say that you have an athlete who falls apart at 180 in the 200. He might be able to hold it together for a couple of seconds and finish the last 20 meters. But if you take that same athlete and put him in the 400 and he's getting out up to speed and he starts falling apart by 180, now instead of having 20 meters left, he's got 220 meters left, and that's going to get ugly really quick. And this is why the long sprints have such an emphasis on running an efficient race, because it's not just getting up to speed and then the race is over. Now, when we're talking about the 200 versus the 400, the reasons for this fatigue are actually pretty different. If you're talking about the 200, it's most likely neural fatigue, and the 400, we're talking about not only energy availability, but also about neural fatigue as well, and your resistance to lactate accumulation. Even though these are different methods for accumulating fatigue, the result is still the same. You want to make sure that you're able to handle the amount of fatigue the race is going to bring you, and you don't want to go out so hard that you're falling apart down the stretch of the race, regardless of the cause. So if we want to talk about efficiency only by changing the race execution, the first place we want to go to is our acceleration. And this makes sense. Acceleration is the most energy intensive part of your race. It takes a lot of energy to save even a little bit of time accelerating. The difference between a 4.5 40-yard dash and a 4.3 40-yard dash in terms of effort is huge. The amount of training it takes to go from 4.5 to 4.3 is huge. So in a 400-meter dash, if you go out at a 4.7 comfortably, that's going to be a lot easier than going out at a 4.5, trying really, really hard and wasting a lot of time down the stretch. On the other hand, though, you don't want to go so slow that you don't take advantage of having more energy available early. The way your body produces energy, you have the most intense short duration energy at the beginning. And so you want to take advantage of that to get up to speed and then use the lesser energy systems to maintain that speed. So we don't want to try and accelerate late around the backstretch. The 400 is still very much a sprint. The 200 is very much a sprint. These aren't races where you're going to kick late. That's not really a thing. You want to follow the same model in pretty much every race, which is get up to speed and then try and maintain that speed without decelerating. Now, in practice, we might try to accelerate at 100% all-out intensity. And that makes sense. We're working on the skill of accelerating. We want to see what the maximum capability is. But in a race, there are some severe disadvantages to accelerating at 100%. It takes a lot of energy and creates a lot of fatigue to go at 100%. And it does give you the fastest time through, let's say, 30 meters. But if you run at 95%, you can still be very close to the other athlete through 10, 20, 30 meters, and you're only, a tenth, 2/10 of a second behind them. But now, as you complete the race, you've gotten up to a very similar speed and you have a ton of energy and the ability to maintain it. And so that makes a big difference for a lot of athletes, is just not using all of their energy to hit a certain speed. You don't win the race at 10 meters. You win it through 200, you win it through 400. And so we want to find this balance between going out hard enough to take advantage of that higher energy availability early, but we also don't want to go out so hard that it costs us time down the stretch. It makes sense to get up to top speed because the clock's still running at the beginning. But we also have to make sure that when we're accelerating hard, the juice is always worth the squeeze. You don't want to be accelerating so hard that it damages the later part of your race. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to implement this. For most workouts, you're probably only going to model 50 to 75% of the race. Again, we want to make sure that we're not getting to the most fatiguing part of the race, and your acceleration is really what matters and sets up the race going forward. If you make a huge mistake at 10 meters, that's going to cost you for the next 190 or 390. If you make a mistake with 20 meters left, it's not going to be able to impact that much of your race. And a great way to measure this is just to set up some cones along different markers. There are times where some coaches will include an over distance workout where you try and hit, your 200 time and then continue for another 50 meters. You might try and run your 400 and hold on for as long as you can. There are times where that might be appropriate for your athlete, but you also have to keep in mind that that is an extremely fatiguing workout, because not only are you finishing out the race, but then you're adding some distance onto it. The most important thing for a race modeling workout is 1, hitting the target time, and 2, the way you hit the target time. If I have 2 athletes who are supposed to run a 24-second 200, but one of them crosses the finish line looking really good, and the other accelerates too hard and is falling apart, but still gets there in 24 seconds, they might have both hit the time, but if you put the 2 athletes side by side, it's very obvious who would have the advantage if you extended the race for another 200 meters. The best way to measure these workouts is usually just with a stopwatch and some cones. Some coaches might prefer to do timing gates, but I think it's a lot more hassle than it's worth, because it doesn't really matter if these are accurate to a 1/10 of a second or a 1,000th of a second. We're working with pretty big numbers here, like 24.5 is not a crazy exact number. But if you see your athlete coming in at 27, he's pretty drastically missed it. An important part of your race strategy is knowing what your expected time is. And this can be really difficult for some athletes because they've kind of only run the 100. They don't know what they should be running in the 200. They've only run, the 800. They're having a hard time coming down to the 4. A really great benchmark for this is to have an all-out 100-meter time trial. And I know we talked about the other races that there's a lot of fatigue that comes with that, but I think for the 100-meter, it's worth it because you can use your 100-meter time to predict your 200 time and to predict your 400 time. Now, if you're an 800 runner and you're coming down to the 400, it's going to be a lot harder to find that split. So you might do an all-out 200, even though it's really fatiguing, because a lot of 800 runners just aren't comfortable coming out of blocks. And so that can make a really big difference in 100, and a 200 gives you a more accurate predictor. For the 100 meters, you're going to get out hard, get all the way up to speed, and hold on for dear life, go through the line. There's nothing crazy about that. Talk about the 200. Your ideal time is about double your 100-meter best. So this doesn't mean that you're running an all-out 100 and then trying to run it again. It means you're going to run at about 96 to 97%, and then you're going to close out the second 100 even faster than the first. And that might sound crazy to run the second half faster because we're trying to use more of our energy early on, right? Yes, but you also have to imagine that when you get around the bend onto that second 100 meters, you're already up to speed. And so you've taken all of the acceleration out. So the second 100 almost always by nature takes less energy than the first. And for a 400, we want to predict this based off of that 200 best. So we want to double your 200 time and then add about 3 or 4 seconds. Now this 3 to 4 seconds, yes, it's there to buffer the amount of time you slow down during the race, but it's not like you're going to run an all-out 200 and then try and run your 200 plus 4. When you actually run the race, it's going to look like 200 plus 1 second, and then 200 plus 2 or 3 seconds. 2 or 3 really depends on how naturally the 400 comes to you. You want to run that first half under control, about a second off of your 200 PR, and then close out very close. And the reason we want some level of a differential towards the beginning and the end, that gives us a really good confirmation that we ran hard enough to take advantage of the energy early. So we'll look at a couple of athletes and determine what's wrong with their race. The first athlete runs 26 and 26.1. That's a really even race, which means he's probably not completely fatigued at the end. He probably looked good coming down the stretch. The reason that we might have a problem with that is that that athlete could have probably saved time by running faster earlier on. He probably could have run a 25.5 and still gotten close to 26.1 because he wasn't slowing down as much as we expect. And so in that case, you might want to tell that athlete to go out harder. This is really common in younger athletes who are scared to go out hard in the 400. We don't want an even split because it probably means you can go a little bit harder. The second athlete is somebody who goes out in a 23 and closes in a 31. That is a huge differential. Clearly, that's an athlete that is falling apart down the stretch. It's looking ugly. And that tells us that if they go out a little bit more controlled, if they go out and run something like 25 and add 2 seconds to the beginning, they can probably save more than 2 seconds down the stretch because of how far off the differential was. Now, another thing I briefly want to mention, especially in talking about the 400, your ability to tolerate lactate and neural fatigue are really important in the 400. So if you have an athlete who goes out at their expected time, but still doesn't finish well or has a pretty wide differential, if you're really early on in the season, that might just be an indicator that they're not quite in shape yet. And so as a coach, you have to be a little bit discerning. Is this a pacing issue or is this a conditioning issue? And if that might be just a lack of conditioning, and that might be something that improves throughout the season, even without altering the race strategy. So especially early on in the season, I think it's valuable to be a little more aggressive and risk fading later in the race, because as you do that, you're going to get a really valuable stimulus and a really valuable rep to getting in shape. Whereas if you keep running really even races, the back half of that race isn't going to come down very much. If you're race modeling for the 200, you can probably extend that to 120 and 150 because you're not accumulating a lot of lactate. This is mostly neural fatigue, and so we're not as concerned. When you're looking at high levels of lactate in an athlete, that can be really damaging to their body and take a lot to physically recover from. So for a 200 meter athlete, you might do 75% of the race, but for a 400 meter athlete, you might only go up to 200, 250. And so in a 400 meter race model, we might do a less percentage of the race, knowing that it's still going to be more total volume and it's still going to be very fatiguing to recover from. I'm not going to talk much about 800 meter and above athletes. Pacing is super essential for them, but they're almost always going to do the workout style. A lot of coaches will have their athletes do a percentage of your 800 for their speed work. They might do a percentage of your marathon pace for your easy run. So almost everything in distance running is built off of percentages. And to me, that's wildly different from sprint training. So I don't think it necessarily transfers over 1-to-1. But if you're an 800 meter athlete, there is a huge advantage to being able to run your race consistently. If you have a guy that can go out and run a 29 every single time, when you're building up the race model, knowing that that first 200 is going to be consistent is a really big advantage. So now that we've talked about paces, your race model, how you might do that, now I'm going to talk about when to do these workouts. I think they're most effective late in the off season or early on in the season. And this is a really crucial time because if you do them too early, we're kind of wasting the off season. We want to use the off season to make our athletes faster, better accelerators. We want to be working on the energy systems of the body as the off season continues. We don't want to worry about race modeling, trying to take a guy who's a 56-second 400 guy and get him to a 55-second 400. We would much rather increase his speed, increase his acceleration, so that when the season comes, we can quickly get him in shape and have him running 52, 53. So in the off season, this isn't very valuable because it's so specific that you're not going to see benefits from repeatedly doing it. It's hard to progress. And it also changes if your athlete gets much better. You're going to now change the times you want him to hit. So we would much rather see athletes just get faster, get stronger throughout the off season, and only do this getting into the season. Now, late in the season, a lot of athletes might not want to do this because they're racing a lot. So there's only a small window of time where workouts like this are super beneficial, because if you're racing 2 times a week and you're a high school athlete, you got a meet on Tuesday and a meet on Saturday. Those are functionally race model workouts. They're very high intensity workouts that are difficult to recover from. And so when we're doing that, we don't want to give our athletes a third brutal session in the week. We want to use that third session to keep our athletes sharp, keep them fresh, do the recovery work that we need to do throughout the week, and then let your athletes race their way into shape at that point. But if you're an athlete who only races a few times throughout the season, maybe you're more of a hobby runner and you only go to a couple of meets, these can be really effective to put between meets to keep the skill of racing pretty sharp. As always, if you have questions, let me know in the comments down below. I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you guys for watching, and subscribe if you like these videos. The rest of the channel is exactly the same stuff, so I hope you enjoy.